Does it seem a bit drafty in here? I'm really sorry for that. Writing the first draft of a book can be a daunting, overwhelming, frustrating, and taxing experience. You will constantly see flaws appearing in your work, like how daunting and overwhelming mean the same thing, so I probably don't need both. You're likely going to have doubts about your story and characters, and pushing through to the end to actually finish the draft can be difficult. It is very easy to get discouraged in the drafting process, especially if you're a new writer. So here's some advice on how to write a first draft and also hopefully finish it. Tip number 1. Find a method that works for you. This covers off everything from whether or not you use an outline to whether you write your draft out by hand to stranger approaches like writing the entire draft out on index cards. It also applies to things like whether you write at home or in a public space. Everybody is different, and where, when, and how you write is going to affect how well you write. Figuring out what works for you is going to be a bit of a process, as there's no real way to do this except by trial and error. When you feel that something isn't working out, try shifting your methodology around and seeing if it improves things. You may find that writing on the computer gives you the urge to constantly go back and edit things, so maybe it's better to write things out by hand. You might find writing in a public place like a coffee shop a little bit too distracting, so maybe writing in a quiet space at home is a little better. I did a video on motivation a while ago, and this closely relates to that. Make sure you watch the video on writing motivation, not character motivation. Although you can watch them both. Watch all of my videos. There's a lot of different approaches out there to writing, and they all work for the right people. Finding a method that works for you is going to make the drafting process much easier and increase your chances of success. Tip number 2, do some planning. Do you hear that? Listen carefully. It's all the pantsers out there freaking out about what I just said. Listen, I know not everyone out there likes to do a lot of planning before they start writing. I mean, we don't all have months to lay out a few thousand years of history within our literary universes. What kind of loser spends their spare time doing that? If you're a new writer or you've struggled with getting a first draft finished in the past, then doing some upfront planning beforehand can be a big help. While you don't need to have every single detail and scene of your story mapped out ahead of writing your draft, having at least a direction you want to take the story in is definitely a good idea. You might have an ending you want to get to, a cat that's making a bunch of noise in the room while you're trying to film. You might have an ending you want to get to, a theme you want to convey, or a setting that you want to explore. Having these kinds of guideposts or goals for your story will help keep your draft focused and reduce the chances of you getting stuck. Don't worry too much about getting every detail mapped out perfectly, as we'll see in the next tip that can actually be a problem. Tip number 3, don't worry about quality. For now. While you should always strive to put out the best writing that you possibly can, it's perfectly acceptable for your first draft to fall short of this. You may write entire scenes that don't work and end up getting removed from the book entirely. You may have weak dialogue or clunky phrasing in places. You may have glaring plot holes that you could lose a truck inside. None of this matters during the first draft, and all of these issues can be fixed through the revision process. The goal of the first draft is not to create a perfectly polished piece of writing, perfectly polished piece of prose. It's about getting the first version of the story down, flawed as it may be, so that you have a good place to begin editing from, which ties nicely into tip number 4. Tip number 4, finish the draft no matter what. It is very common at some point through the first draft for things to start not going great. In fact, I would probably say it happens every single time. In fact, I would say if it doesn't happen to you, you're probably just naturally gifted or are not doing something right. The setting might not be working, the characters may have no chemistry, the plot might seem boring and dragging, all kinds of pleasant things that don't at all impact your desire to actually write. As much as the story will seem like garbage, as much as you will feel like quitting, as much as you will really want to start working on that other new idea you have, don't stop writing. Finishing a first draft will be difficult, but what you will learn throughout that process is tremendously valuable. Yes, there are plots and stories that just will not work, and it makes logical sense to abandon those. And a lot of the time you won't know that they don't work until you actually write them. But if you're a new writer, you probably don't have the ability to make that judgment, and you're likely to feel that way about anything you start writing, so don't give up. Push through those feelings and produce a draft, no matter how horrifying it may turn out to be. Again, the purpose of a first draft is not to create something perfect. Even the greatest stories out there likely started out as a first draft that the author didn't feel great about. But in order to get to that great story, you need to start with a completed draft. Well, you start with nothing and then you write a draft and then you revise, you know what I mean. So keep working on the draft no matter what. There's no surefire solution to help you finish the draft. Really, the only advice I can give you is to keep writing. This is an area where having a writing routine can help. I did a video on that a while ago. Outlines can also be helpful here, as they will at least give you a direction to go in and something to fall back on when things get tough. But ultimately, it all comes back down to not giving up until the job is done, just like how this video is done. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice videos and subscribe to my channel. I post new writing advice videos every Wednesday, hopefully. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. I'm gonna try that again without the voice crack. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.